Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson and Douglas Mackenzie here again to talk to one of our cronies from around the Burns world. Hi Jim, how are you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody.
Folks, tonight our guest is the past president of New Cumnock Burns Club and the current secretary of New Cumnock Burns Club. Cronies everywhere, please welcome Graeme McLatchie.
Thanks, Douglas. What a smashing introduction that was.
No bother, Graeme. How you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. I'm happy to be here, see the two of you and get a chance to take part in your podcast series. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, if you've seen any of these podcasts, Graeme, you'll know that the first question is always the same. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, Douglas. So you mentioned that I am a past president of New Cumnock Burns Club and I'm currently the secretary of the club. I'm from New Cumnock originally. Well, whisper it, strictly speaking, Cumnock. My mum and dad moved to Cumnock when me and my brother were kids, but all of my family are all New Cumnock, born and bred. 43 years old. I live in Paisley now. I've lived up here for about a dozen years. Work up here for Renfrewshire Council, where I work in communications and marketing, which isn't as bad as it sounds. We don't just work on PR and spin, we work on websites and social media and big events. So it's quite an interesting job. So do like my work, do like living up here in Paisley, which has got a good Burns connection as well. As I said, from New Cumnock, I'm family from New Cumnock, both sides. And I've been a member of New Cumnock Burns Club since I was about 17, president in 2015. I've been the secretary for the last 4 years, and we'll maybe touch on this later on. Also organised the club's infamous annual trip for the last 3 or 4 years pre-pandemic, when we were able to get away and do these things.
What about schooling? Did you go to school in Cumnock, as you said?
I did. I was a good boy. I went to school. I didn't plug it many days at all. I was Greenmill Primary School at the Bar Hill, and then I was Cumnock Academy for my 6 years. After that, I went up to Aberdeen University for 4 years, where I studied economics and history. A year at Strathclyde as well, to get my marketing qualification, which is sort of led to the job opportunities I was able to take up. Also spent a year living in Seoul in South Korea, teaching English, which was a very interesting year. I feel like I could almost talk for an hour just about that. So that was 20 years ago now this year. So yeah, that's my education past.
And when you were at school, did you take any subjects that would have indicated an interest in Burns at a later date?
I always remember at the primary school at Greenmill, we always get the singing and the poetry competition, and I remember I think I was in the primary 6 final, and we were doing To a Mouse, and I made the final. I reached the final 5 or 6. And we had to go and recite the poem in front of the primary 7s. And I don't know why, but I started on a really high register. It was To a Louse, it wasn't To a Mouse, sorry. And I started with a really high squeaky voice and kind of went, "Oh, where are you going?" And I remember all the primary 7s laughing. So my first public performance of Burns wasn't the best. I certainly didn't take the prize, but going to school, even in Cumnock, you always get plenty of Abbey Burns, of course.
And you went and you did economics and history, did you say?
I did. That was up at Aberdeen. History was my favourite subject at school. I was always fascinated by history. So a couple of great teachers at Cumnock Academy, including Robert Dale, my history teacher, who was probably my favourite teacher at school. So yeah, economics and history. That was my degree, and it's a really good place to go and study. Aberdeen. It gets you quite far away. You know, you're living quite far away from home, so you do a lot of growing up those 4 years.
It helped you to become self-sufficient.
don't know if my mother and father, who were my financial support at that time, would say completely self-sufficient, but it does put an independent streak in you. I would imagine that probably led to the South Korea expedition and things like that as well.
That's twice you've mentioned that, so you better tell us a bit more about it.
When I graduated from Strathclyde with my marketing degree, I was looking for work, but I fancied a wee bit of an adventure, so I found this online. You could go to South Korea and teach English for a year. They have language schools over there. So it was a wee bit of a punt. Went over there summer of 2001, it would have been, and lived in a small town that was about an hour away from Seoul. All the kids over there study English at private language school. Mum and dad pay. So you can imagine going over there with a Cumnock/New Cumnock accent to try and teach South Korean kids English. Was the first 3 or 4 weeks, even the ones who could speak English and the teachers had no concept, couldn't get their head around my accent at all. So my accent had to get gradually more American as we went on and on. So yeah, it was a real experience. Very, very interesting place to go.
And how did you cope? Because I'm guessing you don't speak Korean. Was there enough English speakers around you?
Not in the place I lived. Very, very few. The husband and wife who ran the school, she could speak a bit of English. He couldn't really. There were 2 or 3 teachers at the school who were quite good, but just around the town, very little. So you had to quickly pick up just a couple of words to get you through. And the other thing I had to learn is obviously it's a different script, it's a different alphabet as well. So you had to learn the basics of that so that you could get to the shop and get what you needed and get to the laundry, get your washing done, get to the train station. So yeah, it was a real steep learning curve just to kind of survive over there that first little while.
Yeah, my youngest son spent a bit of time in Korea, and he also spent a bit of time in Japan. And he made the point, you went to there's plenty of shops, you went to the shop, but you'd almost just to point at things and hope they had in them what you expected them to have in them.
That sounds very familiar, Douglas. And yeah, 1 or 2 surprises when it wasn't quite what you were expecting. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of pointing and a lot of smiling and nodding or shaking your head.
So how did you go about teaching kids English when they don't have it as a language?
To learn that, it's very informal in South Korea. It's not like Japan where you would need a teaching qualification first. They all learn in these schools they call Hogwons, and they learn a lot of phonics. So really a lot of the time there would be a proper South Korean teacher there, and then you were just there to provide a voice. It was really for them to hear a native English speaker's voice and for them to pick it up. A lot of rote learning and a lot of repetition. And kids, I don't know what it's like now, but they had a ridiculously long school day over there. They were at school all day, then they were at piano lessons, taekwondo, English lessons. They were never in the house, those kids. They were out to like 9 and 10 o'clock at night, no problem.
And did you get the chance to see the country while you were there?
Yeah, it was. I mean, Seoul's a mega city. It's a fantastic place to go. What's interesting as well is that there's a big army base on Seoul. There was about 40,000 American GIs over there in Seoul as well. So it's a very cosmopolitan place. You've got American Army and you've got a big international community. So a lot of very interesting weekends, and got a chance to see a bit more of Korea, a chance to travel over to Japan when I finished my contract and had a little bit of money saved up, chance to go to Bali, China as well. So just a really, really interesting part of the world.
Fantastic. What about hobbies and interests? Anything other than buns?
I love my football. Always been a big Scotland fan. Used to go to all the home games, been on a good few away trips over the years as well. So and that's been rekindled, like a lot of fans, that's been rekindled over the past year or so with the team doing so well. I'm also a Heart of Midlothian fan, which is through my father and my uncle Jimmy, or my dad's uncle Jimmy, who was a big policeman through in Kistorfin. That was the Hearts connection. And I really shouldn't say this as a secretary of New Cumnock Burns Club and past president, but I'm also a Cumnock Juniors supporter rather than a Glenafton Athletic fan, which didn't go down that well with my father when I was 12 or 13 and started to go to games, but that would be my other team. But yeah, big football fan. That's probably my number one hobby.
Yeah, because your dad played for the Glens, did you know?
He did, and he coached them. Him and Tommy McGinn coached them as well, and he's still very much a Glens man. So, and my brother, he's a Cumnock supporter as well. So the two of us were a letdown to him in so many ways, but in that way in particular.
Very good. You mentioned your family, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about your family when we got into your interest in Burns. But you can maybe give them a mention, because you're from a kind of dynasty of Burnsians.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, but you're right. It starts with my granddad, my grandpa Colin, my father's father, who was a big part of New Cumnock Burns Club for years. He was president of the club in 1973, which was let me think, how would we express it? The 50th anniversary, the golden anniversary of the club at that stage. And then my father, Ian, he was president in 1988. My dad's also been secretary of the club as well, and he's been a huge part of the club for years. So it was almost a natural progression that when I was old enough, it was just accepted that you would go to the Burns Supper, you would start to get involved in it all, and then once my interest caught hold, I was able to become more and more involved in the club over time to get to the position where I am today.
Very good. And mentioning Colin, I always remember Colin talking one night about the football connection in the family, and was it his father that signed on for Preston North End or something like that?
That's right. My great grandpa, also Colin McLatchie, he played for, I think it was Lanemark United in New Cumnock, and then he went down to Preston to play professionally in the 1890s, and he moved to Sunderland, and he actually won the English First Division in 1901-02. So one of our little family treasures is my great granddad's English First Division winners medal, which was passed down to my grandpa and my dad. We've got some fascinating bits of memorabilia and history from that era. Somewhere at home, my dad's got a copy of the contract when he moved from, I don't know if it's when he signed for Preston or when he moved from Preston to Sunderland, but would you believe he had an agent in 1901-02? He had an agent who helped him negotiate the deal. And a couple of times, my brother went down to Sunderland about 20 years ago. He was able to pick up a book in the club shop, which had a list of everyone who had ever played for them and a whole section about him. Really good player. I think he scored about 20 goals in 120 games. Apparently had a really powerful cross. If you were going to head the ball, you were taking your chances, getting your head in the way of these crosses that were getting fired at you. But the football talent, he's obviously the most talented footballer in the family. My grandpa wasn't a football player. My dad was, and I have to hold my hands up and say I'm not. So potentially the next generation of McLatchies, the football ability will show itself again.
Because you've got a couple of nephews, are they playing football?
I do. My brother has two boys, Alfie and Cooper, who are 11 and 9, and they are both football daft. Ayr United fans, Douglas.
Glad
as
to
well.
hear it.
So hopefully, sorry, Jam, sorry. No, Ayr United. So here's hoping that they certainly love their football. So hopefully there's a player among the two of them.
Well, we talked about your family dynasty and the connection with the Burns Club, and that's probably a good point to move over and get Jim to get you talking about your interest in Burns. So I'll pass over to Jim for that.
I mean, given what you've been saying, Graeme, obviously it starts in the home and then continues at school. Is that roughly the system?
I was thinking about this earlier on, Jim. So me and my brother and my cousin Martin Reid, my grandpa Colin used to take us out for a walk whenever we stayed up there. So I would have said when I was about 10 or 11 was when my concept of Burns sort of emerged, and my grandpa would take us out for a walk up the Afton to go look for Paisley's eggs, but really it was an excuse to walk you past the new Cumnock Burns Club cairn, which he was immensely proud of. He'd been one of the driving forces at the club for the establishment of the cairn in 1973. So at any excuse to walk us up the Afton to the cairn, he would tell us the story again of how the site was selected for the cairn and how you had to be able to see the Afton, you had to be able to hear the Afton. He even used to, I don't know if you'll remember, but in the 80s, you used to get Highlander crisps. And Highlander crisps used to be a haggis flavour. So my granny would get sent to get us haggis crisps. That would be your snack and your walk up the Afton, but he would address the haggis before you could have a crisp. So the three of us wee boys had to sit while he addressed the haggis crisps, the full works, before you get snacking. So there was no chance of avoiding it, Jim. It was always going to be a reality. And then I can remember the Burns supper being a massive occasion in our house. So we lived in Ayr Road in Cumnock, and my dad used to have a few cronies down. Some of the New Cumnock fellas listening to this will remember Wally McDermott, who was a big part of New Cumnock Club for years. Wally was for Bishop Briggs. He worked with my dad previously. He used to come down every year to come to the supper and stay at our house. Wally's wee pal Jimmy. So as a wee boy, I can remember them all coming down on the Friday, getting all dressed up. My mum making great big trays of ham rolls for when they get back for the Burns supper. So those are probably my earliest memories. So that they're very much bound up in the Burns Club and the Burns supper. As much as school and learning about Rabbi Burns at school, it was very much a home thing.
I mean, nowadays there's a kind of trend, or there has been for the last, I'd say, 30, 40 years, to be honest with you, that people go through the process that you've gone through, like with family and school, and then you leave Burns and you come back, but you've never left Burns, really, have you?
No, never really. I mean, my first supper would have been 1996, which was obviously a big one. It was the bicentennial supper. I'm not sure. I think it was in the games hall or the community centre. But I went to that supper. I wouldn't quite be 18. Went along to that one. And then when you go away to university and you go away different places, I've not attended every New Cumnock supper since then. I've missed a few. But by the time I was in my early to mid-20s, I came back home and I was staying at home while I was looking for work. It was very much going along to the supper again and just gradually getting that little bit more involved. And then before you know it, you go to the New Cumnock Burns Club smoker. And then I would have said maybe about 15 years ago, maybe slightly more than that, going at the first of the annual trips. And gradually you just build up more and more interest until you feel that wee tap on the shoulder and somebody says, how would you feel about joining the committee? And that's you for life after that.
You mentioned the trip a couple of times. You need to tell folk what New Cumnock trip is.
I'm sure this has come up in a few podcasts for the New Cumnock fellas, but the New Cumnock annual trip started in about 1990, 1991. I think originally it was a one day affair out in the bus, a few of the cronies and get around a few places, and then over time, Douglas, Chris Rowley, Jim Brown, Jim Hazlitt, Jim Wilson have all been involved in organising the trip, and it grew to become an overnight affair. In fact, I actually remember now, Jim, now I think about it, when I was at university in Aberdeen about 97 or 98, I remember the trip coming up to Aberdeen, and my father gave me a phone, come and meet us, we're having a curry at such and such a place in Aberdeen, and I finished up going away with all the leftovers back to the flat for a big group of ravenous students, because they'd way overestimated how much curry they could get in this place. And I remember taking them into Aberdeen and showing them a couple of pubs to go to, and a few of my pals been really enjoying that Saturday night, meeting the cronies for New Cumnock Burns Club. I would have went my first trip maybe like I said, about 15 years ago, with a couple of my pals who are the same age. So we very quickly, at the time, the trip started to split meal-wise. So they used to go for a curry. Then you started to get a crew who were too old, or too many heart problems, or too many stomach ulcers, or their false teeth weren't right for going for naan bread. So they became the gammon steak brigade. They would detach themselves and go for some gammon steak. So you already had the curry club and the gammon steak brigade. And then when us younger fellas started going, we very quickly get christened the spaghetti hoopers. So we were the youth policy, the young team coming in. And I remember we used to sit up the back of the bus like you always do when you think you're young and cool, up there with Billy Hasty and Charlie Kerr, the other youngins. And Billy Hasty used to make it was like moonshine, Hasty's elixir. And I always remember the label on it saying that it was guaranteed to cure putty willy. I don't know what it cured, but it certainly gave us all a seed on the Sunday morning. That one with Hasty, I think there was 2 or 3 of those trips where we certainly imbibed plenty of Hasty's elixir. But it's been, I've always really enjoyed that. Not just the drink and the curry and the spaghetti hoop slaggings, but also we've been to some absolutely fascinating places that you would just, places in Scotland that would just never occur to you. I learned so much more about Burns, but so much more about the country itself and fascinating history, and not just Scotland. I remember going over to Northumberland and going to Vindolanda and seeing the Roman fort there. The amount of effort that the fellas put into wrecking the trip and organising it was tremendous, and we've had some great weekends.
And you've continued the tradition. You guys of the young brigade that are organising the trip now are doing a great job.
Aye, about 5 years ago, Chris and Jim and Douglas and Jim Wilson took us aside and said, I think we're a bit ready to hand it over. How would you and Robert Shankland, my big pal in the club who's coming up to be president next year, how would you two feel about taking on the trip? And we were a wee bit daunted, but yeah, delighted to do it. So we managed to organise 4 trips, and then obviously, like everything else in the world these past couple of years, COVID's put the kibosh on that. But we're certainly formulating plans for when the virus is going to allow us. We're very much looking forward to bringing the trip back and getting the cronies together again.
Good.
Any favourites in Burns' works?
The one that always strikes out for me is Holy Willie's Prayer. And again, it's the going to the Burns supper element. I think one of those very early Burns suppers I went to, I'm pretty sure it was Edwin Young, did Holy Willie's Prayer, the full performance. So I'm speaking to a pretty knowledgeable Buns crowd, you'll know what I mean. But when you first go along and you see the lights are dimmed and you see the performer dressed as Woolly Wally and going through all that just struck me, the whole performative element of it. It's also a fantastic piece of satire. It's just very funny, very kind of slashing humour at that pompous old lacked religion at the time. So it's a great poem as well. But what I really enjoy about that one is watching it performed live. And when I get the chance to be president a few years ago, that was a poem I wanted to see in Stewart Park. Brilliantly delivered it for us at the supper that year. That's always been a favourite of mine.
Favourite Bun supper?
I need to be the year I was president. I would have to say it's just for those that don't know, when you get your turn as president and you come to the Buns Club, the supper where you take over halfway through the night, you introduce the past president who delivers their immortal memory, and then you almost chair the rest of the night. And then at the end of your year, and you come up, you deliver the immortal memory, and that's a real honour. And I really enjoyed that. I was after you, Jim. I think you were president the year before me, so it was a real honour to take over from you and to have that year. But to then be able to stand up and do an immortal memory for such a knowledgeable crowd at New Cumnock, and so supportive as well, it was just a great night from start to finish. Fantastic.
Graeme, can I ask you, you talked about the Buns connections with Paisley, and given that you're living and working in Paisley, you were able to tell us a lot about Buns in Paisley on the trip that you organised, and it was quite fascinating. A few words just about the Buns connections there that maybe everybody doesn't know about.
So one of the oldest Buns clubs in the country is here in Paisley, but it probably starts with Robert Tannahill, the weaver poet here in Paisley, who Buns would have known of. It's quite a tragic story. Robert Tannahill, he took his own life, and we were able to. Douglas, you mentioned about the trip. So the first trip that we organised, we brought the company up to Paisley. We took the cronies to the Tannahill's cottage, which is not far from where I stay in the West End of Paisley, which is actually the home of Paisley Buns Club. Paisley Buns Club look after Tannahill's cottage. And we were also lucky enough that just that year, Paisley Museum had discovered a manuscript that Buns, it was a piece of poetry that Buns had produced for, I can't quite remember now who it was for. He'd almost sort of dashed it off as the reply to an invitation. And it had lain in the archives for years and years undiscovered, and it had been just found that year. So we were able to go along to Paisley Museum that morning, and the curator was able to bring it out for us, let us see it and tell us a bit about it. We also got one of the first statues to Buns is in Fountain Gardens in Paisley's West End. So yeah, there's a really strong connection up here.
I think too, though, that there's a lot of folk don't understand the influence that Tannahill did have on Buns, and I would recommend to folk to just read the later Harvey Simpson and then read Tam Samson, and if you can distinguish the difference between the two, you're a better man than I, Gunga Din, as the poet once said, and it's clear for that Tannahill obviously played quite a large part in Buns's career as a poet. However, moving on a wee bit, I mean, we ask people this question and it gets varied, but characters in the life of Buns, or people that you've met through being a Buns Club member, is there anybody that stands out to you? Anybody you recall or you want to mention?
It's hard to single anybody out, only because there have been so many at New Cumnock Buns Club. But over the past 5 or 6 years, being president of the club and then taking on the secretary role as well, you get involved in the Ayrshire Association, you get to meet more and more people from more and more clubs. And we've also organised events such as our St Andrews debates, which I know you were a very big influence on, Jim. You introduced that in your year as president. But those, I really enjoy that event every year, and the fact that we get 3 clubs along, and we've had a lot of different clubs who've taken part in it over the years. You get to meet more and more people who are interested and enthused about Robert Burns and his work, and I just enjoy generally that chance to meet people, and that shared interest being an excuse to get together, to appreciate the work, but also to enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, well, the only real question that's burning inside me, I've got to say, is where the 22 trip's going to be, but you're not going to tell me. So.
Yeah, that's the other thing about the trip that I didn't mention. It's always a mystery tour. We've done a lot of Burleys, run a lot of roundabouts over the years, pretending where we were going to come off, what junction it was going to be. So the cronies quite enjoy the fact that they don't know where it's going to be. So we'll like to keep it that way. We'll keep it under the hat as long as we can, even on that morning when we first get you on the bus.
Graeme, you've been secretary of the club for a few years now, but obviously the last couple of years have been a major challenge for secretaries. Is it worth just talking through what's happened in the last couple of years as far as New Cumnot's concerned? And obviously as secretary, you're the driving force in the club.
I remember it well, March 2020, when everything was happening. One of the first conversations was with the president at the time, Ian Sloan, and everything's WhatsApp messages these days, but we were WhatsApping each other saying, what we're going to do with this smoker, it's 3 weeks away, and the first couple of people are saying they're concerned about going. And Robert and I were also messaging saying, this doesn't look good for going a trip. And I remember joking about this recently, but you know, the thought of calling off an event, you just thought to yourself, that just sounds crazy. The Burns Club calendar's set in stone. You know, everything happens. So we were quite nervous about calling off those first couple of events. And then when it became more and more serious, once we got to August, September 2020, and it became clear we weren't going to get through winter without another lockdown, we had to start serious conversation in the committee about, you know, not having our traditional annual supper as every other club also went through. We managed to have a really good online Zoom supper, which was a great experience. It was great that we were able to do something at that stage when everybody was in the house. I think everyone really enjoyed it. I know I did. I think the communal singing was a particular highlight. I know you enjoyed it, Jim. I think we had 75. And to be fair, we had people logged on from Nottingham and Cumbria and all over the place, Aberdeen. I think we had 75, but 75 members singing the Star of Rabbie Burns at their own pace and their own tune and their own notes down into the laptop at the same time was really quite some experience. But you're right, Douglas, it's been a strange couple of years, and I think it's a credit to everybody at New Cumnot Burns Club, the presidents and vice presidents we've had the last couple of years, the committee and all the members. And I've got to say, when I'm on here as well, the effort that you've made to have the online Burns Club leathers and to do something like this that's kept everyone's interest going. We've got a big year coming up. New Cumnot 2023 will be the centenary of New Cumnot Burns Club. No one would have thought the preparation for a centenary year would have been like this. And only just today we've had to email the members to say that it doesn't look like our 2022 supper can go ahead either. I know a lot of Burns clubs are doing the same thing, but I think we've all shown our resilience, and we've proven that you can still get yourselves together, enjoy Burns and his work, and use it as another great reason and shared interest to bring friends together when it's more important than ever.
I agree entirely. And you mentioned the centenary. And obviously, during that 100 years, the McLatchie family has been very much connected with New Cumnock Burns Club. And I remember my early days in the Burns Club, listening to your grandfather, Colin, and especially at our equivalent, I can't remember what we called it then, but we now call it a Scots Verse Night, where we bring along poetry that is maybe a bit unusual or it's self-penned. And I remember Colin coming along and reading a few poems that he'd written himself, and he pulled a flimsy envelope out of his inside pocket, and that was his poem written in the envelope. And I wondered if you still had access to any of these poems, Graeme.
I'm glad you did ask, because when I was preparing for today, I thought, do you know what I'll do? I'll just go and have a look. So a few years ago, my dad gave me a lot of stuff up in my grandpa's. A lot of those envelopes, Douglas, yeah, it was still poems, handwritten on lined stationery inside envelopes. We got a poem for everything. Me, my brother, my cousins, you would get a poem and a birthday card, you would get a poem at Christmas, you would get a daft wee song and a poem for every occasion. I'm pretty sure I got one for passing my driving test, or if you got a good result or a prize at the school. So yeah, he had loads of them, and I did get a couple. So if you would quite like it, I'll maybe read one out to you.
Yeah, I was hoping you might read two out to us, but what I know do for starters.
Let me have a wee look. I can see actually that my dad has rewritten some of them as well, just to help, because his handwriting is beautiful, but it's not always the easiest to read here. But there's one here called Lousing Time, which seems to be about I'm retiring for the pit. Now, also called The Wean's Finished. I think that was maybe the working title of it. So this one's Lousing Time. Nae mair the early morning rise, nae mair the coughs, the section sighs, nae mair the pains in arms and thighs, the wean's finished. Nae mair the endless run of shafts, nae mair going up and down in lifts, nae mair the headings, ducks and drafts, the wean's finished. Nae mair the nugs and sudden frichs, nae mair the heeds adorned with lachs, nae mair the Rogers fancy flicks, the wean's finished. There's folk retiring every day, and some of them gie huff to say, but that's no me, I'm pleased to say, the wean's finished. For now it's ham and eggs in bed, the kind of life you've never led, and just to say it makes us glad, the wean's finished. After all the work-filled years, all the toil, sweat and tears, all together, shout three cheers, the wean's finished. I would imagine that was one at a Scots First Night that he had just prepared especially for the occasion.
Well done.
Absolutely brilliant.
I'm sure before we finish, we'll get you to read the other one. I think we'll be able to twist your arm.
I've another one. Here's another in here. There's the Pigeon Social, which is presumably the dance at the Pigeon Club. Don't worry, it's quite clean. I think my granny must have censored this one. When days get short and nights get long and autumn's winds blow loud and strong, that's when the pigeon fleeing men put by with care each cock and hen, and guard for frost and cold wind's breath till spring returns at winter's death, when they will plan their next year's team of birds that will fulfil the dream, of trophies, prizes, cups galore, as I'd have done since days of yore. 'Tis then they start to concentrate on this year's Pigeon Social date. This night their annual get-together, when they all meet like Vera brother, and talk about such things as these impossible velocities, and other terms just as profound that in the pigeon world abound. But attendance at this yearly spree is no confined to them that flee. There's others go, as wheels myself, that's just there to enjoy theirself. There's only one requirement, to join them in the merriment. The Crown Hotel, a dinner dance, this function's no just left to chance, where lassies braw and drinking food that's no hard there to create the mood, that gives everybody there a wee chance to forget their care. Then for the pigeon fleeing gents, the highlight of the night's events, the presentation of the prizes, of all dimensions, shapes and sizes. Their glittering, shining presence brave would rival Alibaba's cave. The winner's name's called for the chair. They walk and turn across the flare to get the prize that is their due, depending how quick their do it flew. A just reward for dedication, for patience, skill, determination. The cups go round filled with the best, to give a drink to every guest, and then before we realise, it's all lang syne and up with eyes, to sing horns linked with all our micht, or who will meet some other night. A grand next by we all agree, and though ahead we can't see, we hope that when next year comes round, we'll meet again there in the crown. When the pigeon men next haw their spree, I hope we're there, both you and me. He never, as far as I can, he never flew a pigeon in his life, but I bet you didn't miss a pigeon social, that's for sure.
Oh, well done, Graeme.
I'll tell you one thing, it paints a picture in your head if you get an association when you come up.
Can you imagine it? But there's a wealth of them in bits of paper. It was quite an enjoyable wee hour just going through that box and finding them all again. It was some character, he really was.
Graeme, we've talked about Burns all night, basically, and do you have a favourite couple of lines, a favourite rhyming couplet, something that you think is special for Burns?
I do, Jim, and I talked a lot about my grandpa, but he was the first one to introduce me to this as well. So when I was at school, you had to write an essay about somebody, you had to write a biography, and I was only 11 or 12, and he volunteered himself for me to write about him. So he told me all about Knockshannock, and he was one of the people helping the rescue effort. Tell me about his grandpa, about his father playing football, and he talked about his mum dying and he'd done the Pit 13 and whatever else. And he wanted to finish with a stanza of Burns, and he taught me the lines. So catch the moments as they fly and use them as you ought, man. Who knows but happiness is shy and comes not aye when sought, man. And I finished the essay with that little stanza. And I remember my teacher speaking to me after and asking about it, and I said that was my grandpa's favourite lines. And then I've always liked it as well. I've always thought that it's just a beautiful sentiment behind it. It's just a great example of how concise Burns could be, how he could sum up human emotions and the swirl of them, and like the human condition just so simply. So that's always been a favourite of mine for a personal reason, but also just for the quality of the work, I think.
Excellent, Graeme. And what better way to finish this episode? Excellent verse. Thank you very much for telling us about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Douglas. I've really enjoyed having a chance to talk to you again. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
No bother.